I'm going to start by talking about Jane the Virgin. So I've never seen this show before, but it does seem like something that I would like. I really like the question brought up of what do you think that you would have done in this situation. I do think it is really hard to know what you really would have done, especially if a comment like this is being made from a stranger. I think Jonathan, Amber, and I all recognize that in our responses as well. One thing that I do think is important is to stand up in these situations whenever possible. I noticed that I've actually heard a lot more comments like this one come from maybe acquaintances compared to complete strangers. And sometimes it's harder to stand up to these people because you do know them. But it is important to do so even if it's uncomfortable, which I've learned. I used to be much more passive, but now in most cases I do say what I feel is right. But one problem that I think is related is it worth it to kind of say something in some situations? I think it usually is, but I've heard that argument a lot, and in some cases I do kind of agree. Sometimes it's not worth it to stoop down to someone's level who will just never change their mind and they'll never give you a valid argument to even argue upon, and they'll never realize that they're wrong. The problem is figuring out what situation you're in, because I know some people that you've had this conversation with a million times and it just won't get through to them. It's not worth it to you know reinforce their behavior because they're just looking for a fight. But I think in really most cases that's not the case, and it's worth it to say something, because even if they're not going to change their mind, at least they get reprimanded and say this isn't okay, this isn't what everyone thinks. This also reminded me of the importance of being an ally, because a lot of times people that are directly impacted or insulted by these comments and situations will lose their voice about it, and or them speaking out about it just doesn't seem as valid to the person that may have said the appropriate thing. So it is up to allies to help alleviate that pain and stand up and make sure that people know that no one thinks this is acceptable. I like that Jonathan focused on education, and the way to solve this is just to get people more aware, which I really agree with, and I think that teaching people at a young age about these problems is crucial, and education is really the only way to combat this ignorance. I think a lot of times, unfortunately, people are stuck in their ways, so if we just make sure people don't get in those ways, that will help. So then next, I'm going to talk about the TED Talk about representation in video games. I really liked this one, and it also reminded me the importance of being an ally and standing up for what's right, even if other people aren't. Most people agreed to a point that simply having more people of color in the industry wouldn't change anything, because they would not want to be the ones to speak out on it, which is really fair and understandable. I do think that inclusion in any industry and having more people of color involved just is important in general, and I think that does I think that's just important, but maybe not for the reasons that the speaker was talking about. This is why people with privilege, though, need to be the ones to stand up to it, because in a lot of situations they're going to have a bigger voice, and if a white person, I guess, says, hey, listen, we shouldn't be portraying certain races this way, it might be more effective, unfortunately, just because white people do have more privilege. So we cannot look at people of color just as tokens to say, hey, is this offensive? They're not the voice of all people of color, and we all just kind of need to get better at that. While having an inclusive industry is important in general, we just can't expect it to fix the underlying problem every single time. We need to do that proactively. Being an ally and speaking up will help, though, I think. As someone who doesn't play video games, I'm glad I learned more about it, because it does impact a lot of people, and it affects how they see themselves, especially at a young age. A lot of young people get involved with video games and then kind of carry it through their adulthood. While I did not do a response on it, I did want to talk about the Beauty and the Beast. I personally thought the gay moment was just fine. I think that it's a good sign when movies treat gay relationships just like any other. They couldn't exactly just change the entire storyline like others mentioned in their responses. So this relationship would not really make sense to add into the big storyline and overall, change everything that happens. But I think by just having a gay couple there, acting as any other couple would, just kind of almost being in the background, it was just a normal thing, is really good. I think a gay couple is not something people really need to fawn over or be seen as this crazy extravaganza. They're just a couple like everyone else, and this movie shows that. I think there is a time and a place that there needs to be more, and it needs to be more complex and everything, but sometimes, like in this context, it just wasn't needed. They weren't going to make another subplot, so just having a gay couple, doing coupley things and just being a part of the movie like normal, I think is really good, and I think that's a step in the right direction. Thanks.